The bomb squad robot's metallic claws scraped against the hospital's polished linoleum floor, its mechanical whirring echoing through corridors that should have been filled with the gentle murmur of healing voices. Instead, chaos reigned. Emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red, casting dancing shadows as nurses fled past wheelchairs abandoned in haste. A child's cry pierced the air somewhere in the distance, desperate and fading. Code black, code black. All personnel evacuate immediately. The announcement crackled through speakers with urgent static. Security guards herded confused families toward emergency exits, while police officers in tactical gear stormed through the pediatric wing, their heavy boots thundering against floors still warm from the morning's routine. In room 314, 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez lay unconscious, her small body trembling as her blood sugar plummeted. The diabetes monitoring kit that could save her life sat in an evidence bag 3 floors away, tagged as a potential explosive device. Her mother, Maria, pressed against cold concrete in the parking lot, zip ties cutting into her wrists as she screamed for someone, anyone, to help her daughter. Please, she needs her insulin. She's going into shock. Maria's voice cracked with raw terror, her words lost in the symphony of sirens that had descended upon St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, like mechanical vultures. 2 hours earlier, the morning had begun with such ordinary promise. Maria Rodriguez adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag, checking once more that Emma's glucose meter, insulin pens, and emergency glucagon kit were secure in their dedicated compartment. The bag had been her constant companion for 3 years, ever since Emma's diagnosis turned their world upside down and inside out. Mama, do I really have to stay another night? Emma's voice was small but brave, the way children learn to be when hospitals become familiar territory. She sat cross-legged on the narrow bed, her dark hair falling in tangles around a face too wise for 8 years. The doctors want to make sure your new medication is working perfectly, mija. Maria brushed a strand of hair from Emma's forehead, her touch gentle, but her eyes betraying the constant worry that had become her shadow. Just one more night, and then we go home to Papa and make pancakes. Okay. The pediatric ward buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Nurses moved between rooms with practiced efficiency, their colorful scrubs a bright counterpoint to the clinical white walls. Children's artwork covered bulletin boards, crayon drawings of families and sunshine offering hope against the backdrop of medical equipment and IV stands. Maria had just finished unpacking Emma's overnight bag when she heard the voice that would shatter their peaceful morning like glass against stone. Excuse me, but this is absolutely unacceptable. The woman's tone cut through the ambient hospital noise with surgical precision. She stood in the doorway of room 314, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her manicured fingers gripping a designer purse. Her name was Patricia Henderson, though she preferred the title Mrs. Henderson when addressing what she considered lesser people. I'm sorry, Maria turned, confused by the interruption. This room, Patricia gestured sharply, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light. We specifically requested a private room for my Chloe. She has severe allergies, and sharing space with... She paused, her gaze traveling over Maria's second-hand clothes and scuffed shoes. With other families, simply isn't suitable. Emma looked up from her coloring book, her young eyes already learning to recognize the particular brand of coldness that some adults wielded like weapons. The hospital assigned us this room, Maria said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Emma needs to be close to the nurse's station because of her condition. Her condition? Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless. Chloe has life-threatening allergies, real medical emergencies. not some lifestyle choice that could be managed with proper diet and exercise. The words hit Maria like physical blows. 3 years of fighting insurance companies, of midnight emergency room visits, of watching her daughter inject herself with insulin because her tiny pancreas had decided to stage a revolt against her own body. 3 years of judgment from people who couldn't understand that type 1 diabetes wasn't caused by too much candy or lazy parenting. Diabetes isn't a lifestyle choice, Maria said, her voice finding strength. It's an autoimmune condition. Of course it is. Patricia's tone dripped with condescension. Look, I'm sure you're doing your best with your situation. But Chloe comes from a family with considerable influence in this hospital's fundraising efforts. Dr. Mitchell assured us personally that she would have the finest accommodations. Nurse Sarah Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression diplomatically neutral, but her eyes sharp with years of experience managing difficult situations. Is there a problem here? Yes, there certainly is. Patricia turned her attention to the nurse. I need to speak with whoever is responsible for room assignments. This mixing of patients is simply inappropriate. Sarah's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Both children are assigned to this room, based on their medical needs and our current capacity. If you have concerns, I can arrange for you to speak with the charge nurse. I most certainly will, and I expect this situation to be rectified immediately. Patricia's gaze swept the room once more, taking in Emma's modest belongings and Maria's defensive posture. Some families clearly don't understand the standards expected in a facility of this caliber. After Patricia left, trailing clouds of expensive perfume and entitlement, the room felt smaller somehow. Emma had stopped coloring, her small hands folded in her lap. Mama, are we not supposed to be here? Maria's heart broke a little more, the way it did every time the world reminded her daughter that not everyone would see her as worthy of kindness. We belong here just as much as anyone else. Mija. Never forget that. But Patricia Henderson was just getting started. Over the next several hours, she waged a campaign of complaints and demands that rippled through the hospital's administrative offices like stones thrown into still water. She questioned Emma's insurance coverage, demanded to see Maria's identification, and made pointed comments about certain types of people who might abuse the hospital's charity care programs. When the charge nurse politely but firmly declined to move either child, Patricia's demeanor shifted from haughty to vengeful. She spent the afternoon watching, waiting, building her case with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to getting her way through persistence and intimidation. The opportunity came during Emma's afternoon blood sugar check. Maria opened her medical bag on the bedside table, arranging the glucose meter, test strips, and insulin pens with practiced efficiency. The bag's contents were clearly labeled, each item bearing medical manufacturing marks and prescription labels. But to someone determined to see threat where none existed, they might look suspicious to the untrained eye. Patricia watched from the doorway as Maria prepared Emma's medication, her mind calculating possibilities. The syringes could be described as needles. The glucose meter, with its digital display, might pass for some sort of electronic device. The chemical test strips and alcohol wipes could be painted as dangerous substances in the right light. When Maria stepped out to speak with a doctor, leaving the medical bag open on the bedside table, Patricia made her move. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. I need to report a suspicious device at St. Catherine's Children's Hospital. There's a woman here with what looks like bomb-making materials, wires, chemicals, electronic devices. She's been acting very nervous, and I think she might be planning some kind of attack. The 911 operator's voice was professional but urgent. "Ma'am, can you describe exactly what you're seeing?" Electronic devices with digital displays, multiple syringes, bottles of clear liquid, chemical strips. She keeps checking her watch and looking around nervously. "I think she's waiting for something. Please. There are children here. You need to send someone immediately." "Ma'am, we're dispatching units now. Please move to a safe location and do not approach the individual or the suspicious items." Patricia ended the call with a satisfied smile. She had learned long ago that the right words spoken with the right tone of panic could mobilize authority in ways that money alone sometimes couldn't. Within minutes, she could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The first police units arrived with lights flashing, but sirens silent, not wanting to cause panic until they could assess the situation. Officers moved through the hospital with practiced stealth, their hands resting on weapons as they made their way to the pediatric ward. Maria was returning from her consultation with Dr. Patel when she saw the officers approaching. Confusion flickered across her face as they surrounded her, their expressions tense and focused. "Ma'am, we need you to step away from the room and keep your hands visible," the lead officer commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I don't understand. What's wrong, my daughter?" "Ma'am, we've received reports of suspicious materials in your possession. We need you to comply immediately for everyone's safety." Behind them, Patricia watched with careful attention, her phone ready to record what she was certain would be a vindication of her suspicions. Other families in the ward began to notice the commotion, parents pulling their children closer as whispers spread through the corridors. "There's been a mistake," Maria said, her voice rising with panic as more officers arrived. "Those are my daughter's medical supplies. She has diabetes. She needs them." "We'll sort this out, ma'am. But right now, we need you to cooperate. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The zip ties cut into Maria's wrists as she was secured, her protests growing more desperate as the reality of the situation crashed over her like ice water. "Please, you don't understand. Emma needs her insulin. She's diabetic. Those supplies are keeping her alive." In room 314, Emma watched through the doorway as her mother was led away in restraints, her 8-year-old mind struggling to process the nightmare unfolding before her eyes. Nurses tried to comfort her, but their own confusion was evident as they received orders to evacuate the ward. "Where's my mama? I want my mama!" Emma's cries echoed through the corridor as she was lifted from her bed and carried toward the emergency exits. The hospital's emergency protocols kicked into high gear with mechanical precision. Code black announcements echoed through every speaker, sending staff and families into controlled evacuation procedures. The bomb squad was called, their specialized unit rolling toward the hospital with lights and sirens that announced their arrival to the entire city. News crews began gathering in the parking lot, drawn by scanner reports of a potential terrorist threat at a children's hospital. The story was too dramatic, too frightening to ignore. Local reporters set up their cameras with the hospital's facade as their backdrop, ready to broadcast breaking news of crisis and chaos. Inside the evacuated building, the bomb squad's robot moved through empty corridors with mechanical purpose. Its cameras focused on the medical bag that had been left on Emma's bedside table, the innocent collection of life-saving supplies now transformed into evidence in a terrorism investigation. The device appears to contain multiple electronic components and liquid substances. The bomb tech reported over radio, proceeding with standard protocol for unknown explosive materials. Outside in the parking lot, Maria struggled against her restraints as she watched the news crews arrive. Her worst nightmare was becoming public spectacle. Her daughter's medical condition twisted into something sinister and threatening. "My daughter is diabetic," she screamed at anyone who would listen. "She needs her insulin. She's going to go into shock without her medication." Patricia stood among the crowd of evacuated families, her phone capturing video of Maria's breakdown with the calculating eye of someone building a case for her own righteousness. She had told the truth as she saw it. And if that truth happened to align with her desire to see this woman removed from her daughter's room, well, sometimes justice and personal satisfaction coincided. But inside the hospital, Emma Rodriguez was facing a medical emergency that had nothing to do with bombs or terrorism, and everything to do with a little girl's failing pancreas. The stress of the evacuation, combined with her missed medication schedule, was sending her blood sugar into dangerous territory. Nurse Sarah Chen had refused to leave Emma's side, even as other staff fled to safety. She had seen too many diabetic children in crisis to abandon one now, regardless of the potential danger to herself. "Emma, sweetie, can you hear me?" Sarah checked Emma's pulse, feeling the rapid, thready beat that indicated severe hypoglycemia. The girl's skin was pale and clammy, her breathing shallow. "I want my mama," Emma whispered, her voice weak and confused. "I know, honey. She's outside, and she's safe. But right now, I need you to stay with me." "Okay." Sarah reached for the emergency glucagon kit that should have been in Emma's medical bag. But the bag was 3 floors away in the bomb squad's possession. She grabbed the room's emergency phone and dialed the command center. "This is Sarah Chen in pediatrics. I have a diabetic child in severe hypoglycemic shock. I need that medical bag cleared immediately, or we're going to lose her." "Nurse Chen, you were ordered to evacuate. The building is not secure. This child will die without her medication. The bag contains insulin and glucagon, not explosives. I'm a nurse. I know the difference." The command center went silent for a moment before responding. "We'll relay your concerns to the bomb squad, but we cannot compromise the investigation." Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief before slamming it down. She turned back to Emma, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. The girl's eyes were starting to flutter closed, her small body fighting a battle it couldn't win without chemical reinforcement. "Stay with me. Emma, keep your eyes open. Talk to me about something happy. Tell me about home." "Papa makes pancakes," Emma whispered, each word an effort, "with faces." "That sounds wonderful. What kind of faces?" "Silly ones, with blueberry eyes." Outside, the bomb squad was preparing to X-ray the contents of Maria's medical bag when Dr. Amanda Patel pushed through the police perimeter with the determination of someone who had spent 15 years fighting for her patients. "That bag contains medical supplies for a type 1 diabetic child," she announced to anyone who would listen. "Glucose meter, insulin pens, test strips, glucagon emergency kit. Standard supplies that any diabetic family would carry." The bomb squad technician looked up from his equipment. "Ma'am, we have to treat this as a potential threat until we can confirm otherwise." "Then confirm it quickly, because that child is going into hypoglycemic shock without her medication. She could die while you're playing with robots." Dr. Patel's words carried the weight of medical authority, but protocol was protocol. The X-ray would take time, analysis would take longer, and Emma Rodriguez didn't have either to spare. As if summoned by some cosmic sense of timing, Detective Ray Morales arrived on scene. He was a 20-year veteran who had seen enough false alarms and genuine threats to know the difference, and something about this situation felt wrong from the beginning. Who made the initial report? He asked the responding officers. White female, well-dressed. Said she witnessed suspicious behavior and materials. She's over there giving a statement. Morales followed their gesture to where Patricia stood with a junior officer, her demeanor calm and satisfied in a way that struck him as inconsistent with someone who had just witnessed a potential terrorist threat. Mrs. Henderson, I'm Detective Morales. Can you walk me through exactly what you observed? Patricia straightened, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed her story. The woman was acting very suspiciously, constantly checking her bag and looking around nervously. When I saw the contents, I knew something was wrong. Electronic devices, syringes, chemicals, in a children's hospital, no less. Did you recognize any of the items specifically? I'm not an expert in explosives, detective, but I know dangerous when I see it. The woman was clearly agitated, and given the current climate of violence in our country, I felt it was my civic duty to report what I observed. Morales nodded, his experienced eye noting the small details that didn't quite fit. Patricia's hands were steady, her breathing normal. She showed none of the residual stress that typically lingered after genuinely frightening experiences. Instead, she seemed almost pleased with the attention and drama she had created. Had you interacted with Mrs. Rodriguez before today? Patricia hesitated for just a moment, the pause barely perceptible but significant to someone trained in reading people. We had a brief conversation about room assignments. She seemed defensive about her daughter's condition. Defensive how? Argumentative, unwilling to consider alternatives that might have been better for everyone involved. As Morales continued his questioning, the bomb squad's X-ray revealed exactly what Dr. Patel had predicted: medical supplies, insulin pens, glucose monitors, test strips, and emergency glucagon. No wires, no explosives, no threat beyond a mother's desperate need to keep her diabetic daughter alive. All clear on the device, the bomb tech announced over radio. Medical supplies only, insulin, glucose monitoring equipment, standard diabetic care materials. The relief was immediate, but tempered by the realization that a child had been denied life-saving medication for over an hour based on a false report. Emergency protocols began reversing as quickly as they had been implemented, but the damage was already done. Dr. Patel sprinted toward the hospital entrance, the cleared medical bag in her hands, her heart racing with the knowledge that every minute had mattered. Behind her, Detective Morales was asking Patricia Henderson questions that were becoming increasingly pointed and uncomfortable. Mrs. Henderson, you mentioned that you and Mrs. Rodriguez discussed room assignments. Was there any disagreement about your children sharing the same room? I simply felt that given my daughter's severe allergies, a private room would have been more appropriate. And when that wasn't possible, I was disappointed, of course, but I would never let personal disagreements influence my civic responsibilities. Morales had heard similar statements before, usually from people who had done exactly what they were denying. His radio crackled with updates from inside the hospital, and what he heard confirmed his growing suspicions. Detective, we have a child in critical condition from diabetic shock. The medical team is requesting immediate access to the cleared supplies. Copy that. Mrs. Henderson, I'm going to need you to remain available for additional questioning. Inside the hospital, Dr. Patel and Sarah Chen worked with desperate efficiency to stabilize Emma Rodriguez. The glucagon injection was administered first, followed by careful monitoring as they waited for her blood sugar to respond. Emma's small body fought back toward consciousness, with the resilience that children possess, but shouldn't need to use. "That's it, sweetie. Come back to us," Sarah whispered as Emma's eyes began to focus. "Mama." Emma's voice was weak but present. "She's outside. Honey, she's safe, and you're going to be fine." But fine was relative when your mother was in police custody, and your medical emergency had become the center of a terrorism investigation. Emma was alive, but the trauma of the day would leave scars that wouldn't show on any medical chart. Outside, Maria Rodriguez was finally freed from her restraints as word of the false alarm spread through the command post. Her wrists bore angry red marks from the zip ties, but her physical discomfort was nothing compared to the anguish of being separated from her daughter during a medical crisis. "Where is Emma? Is she okay? I need to see her right now." Maria's voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. "She's stable. Mrs. Rodriguez. Dr. Patel is with her now," a nurse reported. "She went into hypoglycemic shock, but we were able to reverse it with the glucagon from your medical kit." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Her daughter had nearly died because someone had decided her medical supplies looked suspicious. The what-ifs crashed over her in waves. What if the bomb squad had taken longer? What if Sarah Chen hadn't stayed behind? What if Emma had slipped into a coma before they could administer the glucagon? As Maria rushed toward the hospital entrance, Detective Morales was beginning to piece together the real story. He had requested access to the hospital's security footage, and what he saw painted a very different picture from Patricia Henderson's version of events. The cameras showed Patricia's initial confrontation about room assignments, her subsequent complaints to hospital staff, and her careful observation of Maria's medical routine. Most damning was the footage of Patricia making her 911 call from a position where she could clearly see the labeled contents of the medical bag. "Mrs. Henderson, I've reviewed the security footage from this morning. You had an extended view of Mrs. Rodriguez's medical supplies before making your report. The insulin pens have prescription labels. The glucose meter is clearly marked as medical equipment, and the test strips are in manufacturer packaging. How did you mistake these for bomb-making materials?" Patricia's composed facade began to crack under Morales' scrutiny. "I'm not a medical professional. In the current climate of terrorism threats, it's better to be safe than sorry." The footage also shows your earlier conversation about room assignments. You seemed quite upset that your daughter had to share accommodations with Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter. "That has nothing to do with my security concerns." "Doesn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you used a false terrorism report to address a personal dispute. That's a serious federal crime. Mrs. Henderson." The color drained from Patricia's face as the implications of her actions began to settle in. Making false reports to law enforcement was bad enough, but making false terrorism reports carried federal penalties that could destroy her comfortable life. "I was genuinely concerned for public safety," she insisted, but her voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. "Were you? Because right now a child is recovering from a life-threatening medical emergency that was caused by your genuine concern. A child who nearly died because her mother's medical supplies were treated as explosive devices based on your report." News of the false alarm was spreading through the gathered crowd, and Patricia could feel the shift in attention from sympathy to suspicion. Other parents looked at her with growing anger as they realized that their children had been evacuated from a hospital based on lies. Inside the hospital, Maria finally reached Emma's bedside, her hands shaking as she touched her daughter's face. Emma was awake, but weak, her small hand grasping her mother's with desperate strength. "I'm here, Mia. Mama's here. You're safe now." "I was scared. Mama, they took you away, and I couldn't breathe right." "I know, baby. I know, but you're okay now, and I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Patel stood nearby, her professional composure barely containing her fury at the events that had nearly cost a child her life. "Emma's blood sugar is stabilizing, but she'll need close monitoring for the next several hours. The stress of today's events could affect her glucose levels for days." Sarah Chen placed a gentle hand on Maria's shoulder. "She's a fighter. You're Emma. She stayed conscious longer than most children would have in her condition." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face as the full impact of the day's events settled in. Her daughter had nearly died because someone had decided their medical supplies looked threatening. The violation felt almost physical. The realization that strangers could weaponize authority against them based on prejudice and spite. Detective Morales appeared in the doorway, his expression grim but resolved. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to apologize for what happened today. We're still investigating, but it appears you and your daughter were victims of a false report." "A false report." Maria's voice was hollow with exhaustion. "Mrs. Henderson called 911 claiming you had bomb-making materials. Based on the security footage and her statements, it appears she was motivated by your earlier disagreement about room assignments rather than genuine security concerns." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Someone had been willing to endanger Emma's life, to traumatize an 8-year-old child, to mobilize a terrorism response against a family seeking medical care, all because they felt entitled to a private hospital room. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "Mrs. Henderson is being charged with making false reports to law enforcement, potentially rising to federal terrorism charges depending on the prosecutor's decision. There will also likely be civil liability for the damages caused by her false report." Outside, Patricia Henderson was discovering that actions had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate satisfaction of getting her way. As word of her false report spread through the community, her reputation was crumbling faster than she could manage. Her husband, Richard Henderson, arrived at the hospital to find his wife in handcuffs and his family's name trending on social media for all the wrong reasons. The foundation board positions, the country club memberships, the social standing they had cultivated over decades were evaporating in real time. "Patricia, what have you done?" Richard's voice carried the weight of a man watching his world collapse. "I was trying to protect our daughter," Patricia protested, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "By endangering someone else's child, by making false terrorism reports. Do you have any idea what this means for our family?" The answer was becoming clear as Richard's phone buzzed with messages from friends, colleagues, and business associates distancing themselves from the Henderson family name. In the age of social media, disgrace traveled at light speed, and Patricia's actions had marked them all as toxic. At the hospital, Emma Rodriguez was slowly recovering her strength, but the psychological impact of the day's events would take longer to heal. She had watched her mother dragged away in restraints, had experienced life-threatening hypoglycemia while surrounded by chaos and fear. The trauma of medical vulnerability had been compounded by the trauma of human cruelty. "Will it happen again?" "Mama," Emma asked quietly.
"What, Mija?"
"Will someone try to take you away again because I'm sick?" Maria's heart broke again. Differently this time. Her daughter shouldn't have to worry about whether her medical condition made her family a target for other people's prejudice and entitlement. No, baby. What happened today was wrong, and the person who did it is going to face consequences. Most people are good. Emma, most people want to help when children are sick. Dr. Patel had been quietly documenting everything for her own report to hospital administration. The fact that a child had nearly died due to a false report targeting her medical supplies raised serious questions about security protocols and bias training for staff. Mrs. Rodriguez, I want you to know that the hospital takes this incident very seriously. We'll be reviewing our emergency procedures to ensure that medical necessity isn't compromised by security responses. Thank you, Doctor. I just want Emma to be safe when she needs medical care. She will be. And I'm going to make sure that every staff member understands the difference between genuine security threats and medical equipment. As the afternoon wore on, the full scope of Patricia Henderson's false report became clear. The bomb squad deployment had cost the city over $50,000. The hospital evacuation had disrupted care for dozens of patients, forcing the rescheduling of surgeries and treatments. The psychological trauma inflicted on children and families was incalculable. Patricia's own daughter, Chloe, was asking questions that her mother couldn't answer. "Mommy, why did you call the police on Emma's mom? She was nice to me." "I was trying to keep you safe, sweetheart." But Emma's mom wasn't dangerous. She was just taking care of Emma, like you take care of me. Out of the mouths of babes came the clarity that Patricia had lost in her fog of entitlement and prejudice. Her daughter could see what she had chosen to ignore, that Maria Rodriguez was simply a mother protecting her child, just as Patricia claimed to be doing. The federal prosecutor's office was reviewing the case with the serious attention that terrorism-related charges demanded. Making false reports about explosive devices or terrorist threats was a federal crime that carried severe penalties, especially when those reports resulted in emergency responses and endangered lives. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh reviewed the file with growing anger. She called in a bomb threat against a diabetic child's medical supplies because she wanted a private hospital room. Are you kidding me? Security footage shows clear premeditation. Detective Morales reported, she observed the medical supplies for over an hour, saw the prescription labels and medical markings, then deliberately misrepresented them as explosive materials in her 911 call. This isn't just false reporting. This is domestic terrorism disguised as civic duty. File federal charges. The charges against Patricia Henderson would ultimately include making false reports to law enforcement, filing false terrorism reports, reckless endangerment of a minor, and civil rights violations. Her actions had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, had damaged lives that couldn't be easily repaired. Emma Rodriguez spent another night in the hospital for observation, her blood sugar levels finally stabilizing after the trauma of the day. Maria slept in the chair beside her bed, unwilling to let her daughter out of sight after coming so close to losing her. In the morning, Emma was discharged with strict instructions for monitoring her glucose levels and watching for signs of stress-related blood sugar fluctuations. The medical team had done everything they could to address the physical effects of her ordeal, but the emotional healing would take longer. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Nurse Sarah Chen stopped by with a special gift for Emma, a new medical alert bracelet that clearly identified her as diabetic and listed her emergency medications. "This is beautiful," Emma said, admiring the sparkly pink bracelet. "It's to help people understand that you're brave and strong, and that your medical supplies are part of taking care of yourself," Sarah explained. "Anyone who sees this will know that you're a fighter." The bracelet was more than jewelry. It was armor against ignorance. a shield against the Patricia Hendersons of the world who might mistake life-saving medication for something sinister. Patricia Henderson's arraignment made local news, her carefully constructed image of respectability crumbling under the weight of federal charges. The woman who had demanded respect based on her social status was now known primarily for her cruelty toward a sick child. Her husband filed for divorce within the week, seeking custody of their daughter and distance from Patricia's toxic legacy. Her friends abandoned her with the same speed she had once employed to exclude others from her social circle. The comeuppance was swift and thorough. The Henderson family's wealth, built on Richard's successful business ventures, was now largely devoted to legal fees and civil settlements. Maria Rodriguez's attorney was pursuing damages for Emma's medical trauma, Maria's false imprisonment, and the family's emotional distress. "Money can't undo what happened to Emma," Maria told her lawyer. "But maybe it can help other families avoid the same experience." The settlement would eventually include provisions for diabetes education programs at the hospital, training for emergency responders about medical equipment, and bias awareness initiatives for hospital staff. Emma's trauma would become the catalyst for changes that protected other vulnerable families. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez was thriving despite her ordeal. Her diabetes remained a daily challenge, but her family had found strength in their survival and purpose in their advocacy. Maria spoke at conferences about medical discrimination, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced the worst and found ways to make it better. Emma almost died that day, Maria told audiences, not because of her diabetes, but because someone decided her medical supplies looked dangerous. "We have to do better. We have to see sick children as children who need help, not threats to be eliminated." Emma herself had become something of a local celebrity, her story inspiring other children with chronic illnesses to speak up about their experiences. She wore her medical alert bracelet with pride, understanding now that her condition was part of her strength rather than something to hide. Patricia Henderson was ultimately sentenced to 2 years in federal prison for her terrorism-related charges, followed by 3 years of probation and community service at a children's hospital. The judge's words at sentencing were harsh and clear. "You weaponized law enforcement against a sick child because you felt entitled to accommodations that weren't available. Your actions endangered lives, wasted public resources, and traumatized innocent families. The fact that your victim was an 8-year-old girl with a life-threatening medical condition makes your conduct particularly despicable." Patricia's fall from social prominence to federal prisoner was complete, but the damage she had inflicted continued to ripple outward. Emma still had nightmares about watching her mother dragged away in restraints. Maria still felt her heart race when she opened Emma's medical bag in public places. But they had also found something unexpected in their trauma, a community of support that transcended the prejudice they had faced. Other diabetes families reached out with stories of their own struggles with discrimination. Medical professionals volunteered their time to educate emergency responders about diabetes management. Strangers donated money to help with Emma's ongoing medical expenses. The hospital where Emma had nearly died became a leader in diabetes care and advocacy, implementing protocols that ensured medical equipment would never again be mistaken for weapons by security personnel. Dr. Patel established a program pairing diabetes families with trained advocates who could help navigate medical emergencies without fear of discrimination. Sarah Chen, the nurse who had refused to abandon Emma during the evacuation, received commendations for her courage and became the hospital's patient advocate coordinator. Her experience with Emma had shown her that sometimes the greatest threats to patients came not from their medical conditions, but from the prejudices of other people. "Emma taught me that being a nurse means protecting patients from all harm," Not just medical emergencies, Sarah reflected. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a hospital isn't a disease or injury, but someone's willingness to see threat where none exists. Emma Rodriguez was now 9 years old, still diabetic, still requiring daily medication and monitoring, but no longer afraid that her medical needs made her family a target. Her mother's medical bag sat beside her hospital bed during routine checkups, its contents clearly labeled and understood by staff who had been educated about diabetes management. The little girl who had once asked if people would try to take her mother away because she was sick now knew the answer: some people might try. But there were more good people than bad, more helpers than harmers, more protectors than predators. Emma's story became part of the hospital's training materials, her experience teaching new staff members about the intersection of medical care and social justice. Her picture hung in the pediatric diabetes clinic, smiling beside a sign that read, "Every child deserves compassionate care, regardless of their condition or their family circumstances." On the first anniversary of the incident, Emma and Maria returned to the hospital not as patients, but as advocates. They met with administrators, shared their story with new staff members, and visited children who were facing their own medical challenges. "The scary thing that happened to us helped make the hospital safer for other kids," Emma explained to a young boy who had just been diagnosed with diabetes. "Sometimes bad things can help good things happen." Maria watched her daughter comfort another child with the wisdom she had gained through trauma, and felt the complicated mix of pride and sorrow that came with watching innocence transform into strength. Emma shouldn't have needed to learn these lessons so young, but since she had, she was using that knowledge to help others. Patricia Henderson, serving her sentence in federal prison, had plenty of time to reflect on the choices that had brought her there. The entitlement that had once seemed like natural privilege now appeared as the dangerous delusion it had always been. Her false report hadn't just endangered Emma Rodriguez, it had destroyed her own family and reputation in the process. In quiet moments, Patricia sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had simply accepted sharing the hospital room, if she had chosen kindness over dominance, understanding over suspicion. But those thoughts led to places too painful to explore for long. So she focused instead on the community service that awaited her release. The hospital where she would eventually work as part of her sentence was the same one where Emma Rodriguez had nearly died because of her false report. Patricia would spend years serving meals to sick children, cleaning rooms where families struggled with medical crises, and witnessing the daily courage of people she had once dismissed as unworthy of consideration. It would be a long journey from privilege to understanding, from entitlement to empathy, from the woman who had seen medical supplies as weapons to someone who might finally recognize them as tools of survival and hope. Emma Rodriguez, meanwhile, continued to grow and thrive. Her diabetes managed with the same medical bag that had once been mistaken for a bomb. She played soccer despite her condition, excelled in school despite her medical needs, and dreamed of becoming a doctor herself someday to help other children like her. Her medical alert bracelet caught the light as she ran across playground equipment, a reminder of vulnerability transformed into strength, of trauma alchemized into purpose. She was proof that children could survive the worst that adults might inflict upon them and still choose to make the world better. The false alarm that had nearly cost Emma her life had ultimately become the catalyst for changes that would protect countless other children. Her mother's medical bag, once treated as evidence in a terrorism investigation, now traveled safely through airports and hospitals, its contents understood and respected by people who had been educated about diabetes care. In the end, love had proved stronger than hate, understanding more powerful than prejudice, and the courage of a sick child more transformative than the cruelty of an entitled adult. Emma Rodriguez had not just survived her ordeal. She had helped ensure that other children wouldn't face the same dangers. That was perhaps the most beautiful resolution of all, that from the ashes of one woman's malicious false report had risen a community of protection, education, and advocacy that would shield vulnerable families for generations to come. Emma's near-death experience had become the foundation for a legacy of life-saving change. And in her hospital room, now decorated with pictures drawn by grateful patients and thank you cards from families whose lives had been improved by the protocols established in her name, Emma Rodriguez slept peacefully, her medical bag sitting safely beside her bed, its contents protecting rather than threatening, healing rather than harming, saving lives rather than destroying them. The false alarm was over, but the true healing had only just begun.